Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Father Show. And today I have a good friend of mine, an attorney, and we're going to be talking about a few things, the LGBTQ law, and we're also going to be talking about custodial rights, especially with with the COVID-19 and how that has played a part in visitations with the other parent. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome a good friend of mine, Mr. Scott Goldman of Goldman Law LLC, and he's based out of Denver, Colorado, but he has other offices in Boulder, Colorado Springs, and he has some more. So I'm gonna let him tell you that. But everybody, welcome, Mr. Scott Goldman. Hey, Scott. How you
Hey,
doing,
good
man?
morning, Mike. Good. How are you?
Oh, man, it's good. It's Friday. I'm happy.
There you go.
Well, we're sitting here waiting on the Delta storm to come. But other than
Oh, I
that,
heard about the hurricane.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. In Colorado, we still have fires raging and smoke in the skies. So, that's our weather. But the other offices are in Phoenix, Arizona, Broomfield, Colorado, and the main one's in Denver. So,
yeah.
expanded into Arizona and looking to go to other states next.
Oh, all right. So you plan on making this nationwide?
I
Nationwide,
don't know
excuse me.
about I don't know about all that, but we'll see. Yep.
Yeah, well, that's good, man. I'm proud of you. It's good to see you
Thank you.
growing so much.
Thank you.
And it's been a short time, so it's not like you're an old man like me. You're still a young.
You know, I'm not an old man like you, um, and you're not an old man, but grays, I'm sure is what we're talking about here. I've been practicing for 11 years, building this business for 11 years,
Yeah,
right out the gate.
yeah,
So it's a very short amount of time in that respect, but I've been at it for over a decade now.
yeah. It's been really good, and I know I've sent clients your way, and I have never gotten any negativity response back. They've always been
Oh,
pleased with your work.
so my payoff to them has worked. Then they haven't said anything bad.
Yeah. So make sure you send that check in the mail now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking at your website this morning and I saw the LGBT law, and I was talking to another person the other day, and we were talking about the difference. Because you know how I am. I think that every child deserves to have both parents,
Yeah.
and that's generally, you need a man and a woman so that the child can learn both sexes and how both sexes work in a sense. And I know with LGBT, when you have two people that are the same sex and they're raising kids, um, you know, how is that child going to turn out in the long run? And I have a child in my family that is gay. I have a good friend of mine that she married another woman there in Denver, and they have a child together. So, is there a difference between the LGBT law and marriage and divorce and between heterosexual couples?
In terms of the way that you framed the question, my answer to you is no. And I've
Okay.
seen kids thrive in both situations. I think that is more of a political faction that takes into account somebody's probably staunch religious beliefs that has no scientific backing to it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is really, where the thoughts on that area of law have come from over the years. So luckily, the Supreme Court of the United States a few years ago recognized that LGBTQ people have the same rights as heterosexual people when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to being married and having a family and children and everything. And I don't think that there's an issue with it at all. As a matter of fact, the most recent adoption, I have my kid's Lego here. Just something to play. But, you know,
Now
they've
that's a
always
good father.
there you go, right? Except for when you step on them in the middle of the night. Those are
Oh
horrible.
yeah, I remember
The
those.
most recent LGBTQ case that I wrapped up 2 weeks ago was a same-sex adoption, of a step-parent adoption. You know, and my client called me initially, and she said to me, she said, you know, we're worried about how we're going to be perceived with the court, and you know this and that. I said, don't worry about it. I will handle it. You're not going to have anything. But there's still these fears, though, about how they're treated and perceived, rightfully so. But, you know, that's my job. My job is to come in here and make them feel, you know, welcome, comfortable, and then also ensure that the law will treat them the same as it should,
Yeah.
right, without discrimination.
Yeah.
You know, and go from there. The problem, though, is that, you know, ultimately the law is full with human beings. So you never know which judge you're going to get on the bench or what you're going to deal with. And that's really where, you know, having an articulate voice behind you can be powerful, and somebody there to stand up for your rights. And that's, you know, what I aim to do. The difference is, though, that we come up with LGBTQ divorces versus, you know, a heterosexual divorce where you have a defined parent. Sometimes and oftentimes there's a donor situation, and we have to deal with, you know, whose rights, if these rights haven't been established yet with regard to the children or child. You know, sometimes we have to deal with those issues, but other than that, no. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're gay, lesbian, bi, whatever. You have the same rights to raise a family. And honestly, you know, when we have to keep dealing with, you know, people out there who say that children won't be as well off, or whatever it is that they're saying, and the rhetoric that they're putting out there, that's what makes the situation harder. But I think that, you know, I would hope that everybody in the LGBTQ community can band together, though, and have that voice heard, that they have just as much of a right to raise a family as a heterosexual family does.
Yeah. And I definitely have no problem with, you know, same-sex marriages and couples raising kids. You know, I don't, in this world today, and the things that we're, you know, the media have been talking about, and what's been going on with all the protests and so forth about equal rights and, you know, Black Lives Matters and all the others, is really, I don't see a problem. And I love my daughter to death, and I don't treat her any differently. I don't think about her any differently than anybody else. And once she bring a partner into the mix, I'm not going to think, you know, I'm going to welcome them into the family just as well as anybody else. So I just wonder, and I don't know, you answer, because since you do this in the, you know, in the court, is it true that most gay marriages actually last longer, or there's less divorce than a heterosexual marriage?
Well, I think that there can only be less divorce because the law regarding divorce was only made a law recently, you know, in the past few years, right?
Right,
so
right.
Based on that alone, you would have a statistic that would say that, but I don't know the true statistics out there. And honestly, it's kind of, or actually it is pretty sad that we actually have to have an area of law carved out where it should just be that anybody can get a divorce, which it is now, right? But before it wasn't like that.
In some states, and unfortunately, it's not in every state.
Yeah, well, it's true in every state, though. I think now, based on that Supreme Court decision, in the I think it was called Ogerfell, I can't even say the last name, but you know, it's that statistic is skewed just based on the way that the law recently came into place. Before, it was a civil union, and there would be dissolutions of civil unions, and there's still civil unions because they existed prior to the marital laws, right? But I don't know that the true statistic based on.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that's hard to say that in a sense of, because it hasn't been going on as long, but it's, you know, especially people able to get married. legally and stay together, because I know that's a just a new thing in the sense of really being married and having the same rights as a heterosexual couple has.
Yes.
So, but it just, I don't know, just from my seeing and looking and being around some gay people, it just people really, that it seems like the gay couple stay together better, longer. When I talk with some gay people, you hear like heterosexual people, and I don't even really want to put it heterosexual gay. Uh, you just see couples, and when you deal with couples, sometimes you hear, oh, they're fighting all the time and they're doing all of this. But I know either way you look at it, as human beings, and human beings have their differences sometimes, and they can't work it out together. So they need to, go their separate ways, bring in an attorney, and what have you. But let's talk about this adoption, and and let me ask you, because I know that the good friend of mine in Denver that had her and her wife had a baby, and if I remember correctly, the wife carried the baby. Now, with the law, is there something where on the birth certificate can the mother or the other partner sign on the birth certificate as the parent?
So that depends on the way in which the baby came about. And generally, yes, we can get that to happen, especially in this adoption that we just had. We added the stepmother onto the birth certificate. But if there is a IVF or other kind of situation where there's an anonymous donor or there's some contract in place with the that facility, that's really where we get into issues to litigate in court and determine whether or not the proposed step parent or the adoptive step parent can then be put on that birth certificate. So the first thing that has to happen is that the parent, the donor, their rights need to be terminated. Once their rights are terminated, then you can do that. But these hearings are 2 and 3 step processes that take place all at once generally. But until those rights are terminated, maybe they're terminated right from the beginning based on the contract anyway. But you still have to go through the adoption hearing. You go from there. However, if that is something that was established from the start, it's a bit of a different process and not something that my firm so much gets involved with. But we definitely get involved with the step parent adoption. So if a gay couple or a lesbian couple becomes married and they want to adopt one or all of the children, I only say one or all because sometimes there's only one child. I don't mean just to single out a child. But then we go through that process. And, eventually, yes, that other parent, step parent, once they have successfully adopted the child or children, would be put on the birth certificate. Okay. And as well, would have all the same rights as though they were a biological parent. And if there were to be divorced down the line, they would be able to claim parental rights for the child or children. Unfortunately, that might come with paying some child support, but that's just a part of the situation.
Hey, that's part of it.
It is. But just the same, too, then the child or children can inherit from that parent. Just the same that anything else, goes on, And so, it's definitely a momentous occasion that should be celebrated, but definitely one where you get the same legal rights just as anybody else once that adoption goes through.
Yeah. And your law firm helps with the step-by-step process and the contract and everything that is involved?
Well, not so much the contract. The contracts are something that we do look at in the context of the case that we're dealing with. Our main focus, though, has been on the step-parent adoptions, which come long after that has actually happened. The contract that you're referring to is generally between a donor and a facility, and then the parent that is carrying the child, and a whole slew of issues that come up there. But generally speaking, we come in and have actually, years down the road where that donor issue and that contract issue have been long removed from the equation. And now we're looking at a step-parent adoption. If we have to serve, and one of the things with an adoption is you have to serve all potential parents, to the biological parents, excuse me. And if it's anonymous and you don't know, then we list John Doe, Jane Doe, whatever we're listing on there to get that person served. But ultimately, it goes through. And I haven't had too many issues with, a contract that existed between a donor and a facility in the past. It did come up in one of our most recent divorce cases, but I wasn't the attorney on that. It was another attorney in my firm.
Okay. Now, even you mentioned, even when you have the divorce and you have gotten everything taken care of, and unfortunately the marriage, starts to dissolve. And with this COVID-19, I think a lot of people have, been locked in together or have gotten divorced and have not been able to see the kids because they are kept away from the other parent and using, say, COVID-19 as an excuse. Do you see a lot of that?
Early on when COVID first started, and actually I should say the pandemic, we saw a lot of that. And it still kind of happens now. But the problem was that early on, every state was issuing orders about staying at home, about not going out unless it's essential, and if you actually read the orders, there was a lot of excuse to make everything essential. I know personally I was at Home Depot more in my life than I'd ever been at Home Depot in my life. And when you had nothing to do, you started becoming a woodworker. And I don't know that it was the best work that I've ever done, but I went out and bought a whole lot of tools. But getting back to the subject, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of instances where I had to get warrants issued by the court to get the children to come back, and people started to just kind of hoard their children and view them more as property, I guess, and keep them from the other parent. And that was a very expensive time for a lot, especially when a child was in another state. And we had an incident right off the bat where a child was in Texas, or children were in Texas, being withheld there, and we had to take appropriate measures to get the children back to Colorado from there, and eventually one of the first things that I did actually was to clarify what Colorado's order said. And eventually the governors of, I think, just about every state clarified that parenting plans still need to be followed. And I think now as of October, 9th or whatever date it is today, you don't see that as much anymore. Of course, there's still the typical custody issues, but nobody, or at least from my perspective, people aren't blaming COVID anymore for withholding their children. But you definitely saw it back in March and April, maybe early May, but March and April for sure. People were blaming COVID, wouldn't go out, wouldn't release the children. But just the other day, I had a 10-hour hearing 2 days ago for the modification of parenting time. And I represented the dad. We've actually represented this particular dad for a couple of years now. But there was an issue with COVID that came up, and the mother refused to get the child. He has a high-risk family now. They've been divorced. The mother refused to get this particular child tested, and now so then there was the fight over whether or not a child needs a test, and no respect from mother to father. And it goes both ways, by the way. There's also no respect from father to mother in certain situations. Right. In this particular situation, honoring his request just to get his child tested because the child had a fever going on for a few days of 103 degrees, just to be sure, because he also had a high-risk family, And so now the fights have turned from withholding the children to whether or not we're going to get a child or children tested for COVID, and fighting over who has sole decision-making. And now the fight actually is turning to do we let the kids go back to school full time, or will they remain remote? So the fight is ever revolving, is what it is now.
Wow. And I hadn't even really thought about that until we talked about it. And that's, you hear people talking about there's going to be more divorces after, because of COVID, people being locked up, and the marriage is already on the rocks. But, with visitation, I hadn't even really thought about that. But that is, you know, you and I both have already seen, how parents, the custodian parent will keep the child away from the other parent and make it hard, especially with traveling. So I'm glad you brought that up because, with the airlines, that's a hard one in itself because, the you get less
I don't know.
flights.
Yeah, but I disagree with the airline argument. A lot of people argue that it's unsafe for the child or children to be put on an airline. And if you look up in the sky, there's still airplanes flying,
Right.
every day. As a matter of fact, it's probably safer now than it was way before because they go through literally Lysol everything, and they have these new air filters, and all these other things, right? But the mode of transportation, if the airlines are still flying, then it has to be safe to still fly, otherwise they're not flying, it's not safe.
Yeah.
And the only recent time in history that I can recall when airlines were not flying entirely, was back during 9/11 when everybody was, all the airlines were shut down, right?
Right.
But even when COVID came up, there might have been just a small hiccup, but flights are still going on. And so then you had these people arguing, well, I'm not putting my child on an airplane and this and that. And that became a part of the fight too. And part of my arguments to the courts were, well, just as I said to you, if it weren't safe, then the planes wouldn't be flying. Put your child back on the plane. Quit looking at your child like, a piece of property and, follow the court orders, right? They're not suggestions to be followed, And again, I know there was a lot of confusion at first, but that was all clarified that parenting plans had to be, followed. And I just flew recently and it's fairly easy. You just wear a covering, the whole time and you're good.
Yeah.
Or you make your coffee last for 2 hours and, you don't need to wear the covering the whole time. Not so sure so many people laugh at that one, but whatever. The point overall, though, is that it has not been, there's not one piece of evidence that suggests that it is unsafe for the children to fly.
Good.
You do have those situations where children, like I said earlier, we're in Texas or whatever, and you don't want your child to fly, then drive them. Whatever you need to do, though, get your child back to the other parent for that parenting time. That's
meet halfway or something. Yeah. Well, and that's a good point to really emphasize that parents need to learn to work together and not use the child as a commodity and a prong and for your anger for the other person. And I'm glad to hear that the court has emphasized that they have to follow the divorce decree, and the parenting time on divorce decree as stated. So that's really good. But let me ask you, and I know that's if a person is saying, okay, well, I know your family is high risk, or I think it's not safe. So you're saying they really don't have a valid point or an excuse to keep the child away from the other parent.
I don't know that I'm saying that exactly. If there is a high risk situation and you have a child who should be tested or whatever it is, first things first is ensuring the safety of the children, right?
Right.
So, well, I think ideally both parents would come together, discuss that situation, whether it's through, the phone, email, or oftentimes, parents should look at things like talkingparents.com, a civil communicator, or Our Family Wizard. Those are 3 good tools that could always be used for talking about the children purposes. So this way they can't be edited and you can use them in court, if you need to. But, I'm not saying that just provides a blanket excuse not to return the child. What ideally should happen is that both parents talk about the situation, without regard to who has sole decision-making and who has joint decision-making, assess the situation. And if the child does need to be quarantined by court or by doctor order, fine. But until you actually have that, then I'm saying there's really no excuse. You understand? Okay. There's a difference, right? Whereas one, hey, I'm not really trying to keep the child from you. I have a doctor's order here that says that he or she has COVID, and we need to quarantine our child. Fine, that's one situation. But what people are doing is saying, well, and I'm going to use your name here, but little Mikey had a sneeze last night, and so I think he has COVID, so I'm going to keep him from you. And there's no basis other than that sneeze, or that. Again, little Mikey, I don't have a better name right now. I guess
he's fine.
But you know what I'm saying, right? He had a fever, and so I'm going to keep him from you, and that's not right. Number one, and number two, it's not legal. And number three, if eventually somebody like me comes along and I file a motion, which is just a document asking the court to do something, but to enforce my client's parenting time rights, I'm going to ask you to prove how it is you knew that child had COVID, and what doctor's orders you were relying on. And when you can't, the court's not going to be too happy about it. And I've heard judges comment, even as recently as September, saying, when somebody would bring up the whole COVID issue, saying, well, COVID was, a big thing back in March and April. Now you're withholding this child for a month and blaming it on COVID, and so this lack of evidence is really driving successful results, for my clients, of course, but it shouldn't get there in the first place.
Yeah, right.
You can go to the University of Google and the University of Yahoo and listen to all the news you want and all the pontification you want. Fine, but at the end of the day, you still are not a doctor that is, and maybe you are, but there's no diagnosis, there's no letter saying, that the child needs to be quarantined, that they definitely have COVID. You're not going to be so successful in court, and there's no reason why it should get there in the first place. And I've had to, in one instance, the mom had to pay dad. We represented dad, and unfortunately, he incurred about over $5,000 worth of attorney's fees, and now she's paying those back for her antics. So it's very serious stuff, but it doesn't have to get there. People can just put aside their differences and act like an adult at times, then these things don't escalate into that. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And my firm is there to help right that ship when we need to.
Yeah. Now, what other law does your firm handle?
Well, the majority of the practice, both in Arizona and in Colorado, and hopefully wherever we go next, but is family law. So divorce, custody, adoptions, grandparents' rights, child support issues, maintenance issues, all these things, right? But another, sub area, we do handle some criminal defense matters, some tax matters when people are being audited by the IRS, and we fight the IRS there. And then we get into other civil litigation matters, usually when somebody has a breach of contract issue or some other issue that comes up civilly, we'll deal with that. But the majority of the practice is geared towards family law in both states.
Okay. Now, and how can, our audience get in touch with you?
There's a lot of different ways that our audience or your audience could get in touch with us. First, our websites. We have the main one is www.goldmanlaw303.com, GOLDMANLAW303.com. The other one for Arizona is goldmanlawarizona.com.
Okay.
And then everybody can call into our main line at 303-656-9529. And we, Erica, who stands by, answers those phones and does a wonderful job in the firm. We'll probably be talking with them first, and then we'll set up a consultation from there. People can email me directly at Scott, SCOTT, at goldmanlaw303.com, and I'll be sure to respond there as well. And if for some reason they're in a situation where they can't afford legal services, and I generally point them in the direction where they can get the help that they need. Because, these cases also, on the line of asking me about, what we do, there's no right to an attorney like there is in criminal defense. So the court can't appoint a lawyer, in a divorce or custody case, with very, 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 very few exceptions. But generally speaking, I'm happy to always point somebody in the right direction, give them the time of day, and help them figure out the information that they need so they can get, the proper kind of representation or have their rights enforced properly. So I'm always happy to give somebody.
Now, real quick, because that's our time, but real quick, you just mentioned something that in a very rare occasion, you will help somebody that can't afford it, or a court will appoint somebody that can't afford it. What are those exceptions?
Well, generally speaking, when we talk about the court appointing an attorney, and they have to apply for that too, there's a financial form that they have to fill out. There's a whole process with that. But generally in a contempt situation where they are facing jail time, or in a dependency neglect case where you're facing the possibility of losing your parenting rights. So it's really when a constitutional right is at stake and you have the possibility of losing it, so your freedom in going to jail or your parental rights being terminated. Very limited exceptions in the civil arena. Whereas in a criminal docket, jail is technically, unless it's a very low level crime, jail is technically always a possibility. So therefore, in those particular situations, you have a right to an attorney. But in a speeding ticket, you generally don't. So that's the delineation there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's going to be our time today. But, Scott, we've done shows before, and I would still like for us to continue. So we'll talk about that a little more. But don't go anywhere. Don't hang up yet. And because I had a couple of questions for you anyway that was on a personal level. So
sounds good.
Yeah, don't hang up. But ladies and gentlemen, that's our show for this week, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure, and like I said, I love having my friend Scott on the show. He's very knowledgeable. He's a very good attorney, and I personally have to put up a disclaimer. I have worked with him, and I've transferred or sent people over to him and recommended him. And I do that because I like his work and I know he does a great job. So if you ever need a good attorney and you're in the Denver area or the Arizona area, or matter of fact, the Colorado area and the Arizona area, give Scott a call at the Goldman law firm. And I'm sure you're going to be very pleased with that. But that's our show for today. And if you are a man or even a woman that are looking for resources that can help you in your day-to-day life, please go to The Father Show with MikeThompson.com and click on resources, and then click on the state that you're in, and we have resources there that can help you. And if you're in a different state and happen to need an attorney, you can find attorneys there as well. Now, you can watch this and other episodes on our YouTube channel, The Father Show with Mike Thompson. And while there, don't forget, hit that subscribe button and then also hit that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode comes up. And we do one every week, so you'll always have something going on. But you can also listen to our episodes on our Facebook page, on my LinkedIn page, on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Twitter, Amazon Music and Audibles, and other apps. But you can always catch the show, so if you don't get a chance to watch it, you can listen to it on your way to work, while at the gym, or other locations. So thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.